Okay, and then I'm also going to first do the Facebook Live, and then we'll start. Okay, we are live on Facebook, so we can start. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the fourth edition of this webinar series on Better Bus Bengaluru. The focus, of course, is Bangalore, or Bangalore, whichever way you'd like to pronounce it. But of course, it could as well be a conversation which could be had in any city. And this is part of a five-part webinar series in which we are trying to bring focus to public transport, and in particular, the bus-based public transport. And the idea really is to ensure that the conversations stay alive, even through this kind of insufferable lockdown or post-lockdown or whatever we want to call it. But essentially to try and keep the focus alive on the fact that the choice of travel and mobility wherever we live has to be in our control. And in that sense, it's exercising also a democratic right to choose to travel in a way that is comfortable, secure, safe, accessible, inclusive, affordable, all of which we are actually not allowed to do now in most cities in India. So these conversations can also be considered as a kind of freedom to walk, freedom to cycle, freedom to bus movement. In that sense, freedom to function, help and be alive. So on that note, let me welcome our moderator for today, who is Vinay Srinivasa. He's an old friend and fellow activist and researcher and lawyer, and also we call him former IT engineer. It's like you're already retired as an IT engineer despite being so young, because their retirement age is by the late 20s and early 30s. So they achieve so much so fast. But he works with the Alternative Law Forum and is also a member of the Bengaluru Bus Prayamikara Vedike, that is Bengaluru Bus Commuters Platform. And Vinay will be moderating this discussion through to the end, and he'll be assisted by my colleagues Sana at the back end, Karthik will be helping also with some slides here and there, and Ashwin was going to work with a team of interns in tweeting this out. So if you follow ESG's Twitter page, Twitter handle as it is called, at E_S_G, you can actually get a live report, a live feed of all the conversations that are taking place. This is also going live on Facebook on ESG's group page, that is Environment Support Group page. And if people cannot watch it because they're moving here and there on Zoom, then they can obviously catch up on Facebook Live. So on that note, let me introduce you to our panelists. It's a very exciting panel we have. First and foremost, we have Professor Dinesh Mohan, who is an honorary professor at the Indian Institute of Technology now. And anyone who has done anything relating to transport or infrastructure has read his work. I mean, it's like the prophet of what should be done right. And everything he says, the government ignores. That's unfortunately why we are all stuck in traffic, why we are not able to move. And if only anyone had the wisdom to listen to him. He has had many distinguished roles before. He was also in the Shivnadar University. He was a Volvo Chair of Biomechanics and Transportation Safety and Injury Prevention at IIT Delhi. And he has studied from IIT Bombay, University of Delaware. He's part of the American Public Health Association. And he's also the Bertil Allman Award, won the Bertil Allman Award of the International Council on Biomechanics biomechanics of injuries. So there is a variety of roles that he has played, but his most outstanding effort has been to try and make people realize that you can't have public transport unless you have cities which are designed for humans and all humans, not just some humans. And not just humans, but also a variety of functions that take place in an urban setting. You'll be today focusing on how public transport changes urban form, or how urban form shapes public transport. But in particular, because the theme today is about making public transport affordable to all, you'll also look at what are the factors where fair pricing, what are the factors that shape fair pricing of public transport. We then have Professor Vinod Vyaslu. He's a former director of the Center for Budget and Policy Studies, and he's also former professor and vice dean at Jindal School of Government and Public Policy at Sonipat in Haryana. Vinod, to many of us in Bangalore, is one of those who actually helped us understand urbanization, basically piloted urban studies in so many fundamental ways. I mean, I can go back to the days when he was at ISEC, when we could just walk into his room and just sit and talk, and thereafter, it's more like you travel with him. And he's also been part of, before that, Institute of Management in Bangalore, XLRI Jamshedpur. He was a director of Institute of Public Enterprise in Hyderabad. He held the RBI chair at ISEC, as I said. And he was also the economic advisor for small scale industries in the Small Scale Industries Corporation. And one of the things that happened to Vinod in the last 2 years is that he literally had to move from Delhi to Bangalore to save his lungs. Little did he know that COVID was getting to it. So he's now been locked inside because he has a condition which doesn't allow him to expose himself too much outside. So we are very, very happy to have you, Vinod. Today we'll be highlighting the public good aspect and the importance of the state's role in defining and conducting itself in a manner that public sector is advantaged, and how, for instance, private sector subsidies eat into public transport or destroy public transport. Then we have Mamta Yajman. Yajman means in Kannada boss. She is a very well-known activist in Bangalore, and she is part of the Gamana Mahila Samuha. And we know Mamta from Mahila Samakhya, from her work for decades with Vimochana, where she worked with women who have suffered all sorts of horrendous violence. And yet one person who I've always remarkably admired, because she deals with such horrific condition of humans, and yet she comes across as the only person you can find on this planet who can smile through it all and liven up your soul. And she has been one of the incredible forces to work with Adivasis or sexual minorities or rural women. I mean, any depressing situation, you give it to her and she'll bring it up into a very lively, resilient and response. Today she's here also because she has done a lot of work with commuters, especially in terms of asserting the rights of all sorts of communities to access the bus. And she lives in the periphery of Bangalore, and literally she is displaced in a sense from the privileges of core city or suburban city public transport users. And having been a bus user for the longest period, she'll be bringing in a variety of perspectives, including particularly the gender perspective. Then we have two students from a network called the Yugma network. Please don't ask me for the expansion, I'll let them expand it. But this one network has done incredible work in bringing to public mind the critical importance of opposing the Environment Impact Assessment Notification 2020, which Prakash Javadekar is so fond of. They have really, I think it's a network of 70 student unions, if I'm not mistaken, and total membership is about 20,000. It's like the 1975 students movement against emergency. I'm hoping the Yugma network will be that kind of force. I'm not sure if you are opposed to the current dispensation which wants to curtail fundamental freedoms, but I hope you are, which is why I think you're also opposing the EIA notification. But definitely you are here because you also want to speak about sustainability of public transport, and two students, Tanika Shankar, who works with, who studies, she's a second year student of economics at Azim Premji University, and Rohit is studying mathematics and political science at Ashoka University. One from Bangalore, one from Delhi. Ashoka is not Delhi, no, it's UP, right?
Haryana.
Haryana, okay, sorry. I thought Ashoka was Bihar, but yeah, that was a long time ago. Okay, that's from my end. And these two students will also help us in appreciating how to revolutionize access through technology, and something they have been working on, and make sure technology is accessible to all in terms of purchasing tickets and making it affordable. On that note, let me invite back Vinay Srinivasa. Thank you, Vinay, and over to you.
Thanks, Leo, and welcome to all the panelists and to all the people who are listening in on this seminar. Firstly, I'd like to thank ESG for organizing this series of discussions on public transport, because world over, or at least in India, as far as transport is concerned, it's like the metro systems which are considered sexy, and the things which need focus and which need discussion, and buses and bus commuters' needs are rarely discussed. And therefore, to have a series of 5 discussions, as has been happening over the last few weeks, is really good, and it's much required. Like Leo said, I'm a former IT engineer, and my move towards this side started thanks to ESG, to Leo, Bhargavi, and their whole team. Which as part of Hasiru Isru undertook a campaign against road widening in 2009-10. And I was also just an ordinary citizen, and I was just concerned that trees were being felled. And only when we started going in, and then we heard Leo and Bhargavi speak about why are the trees being felled, why are the roads being widened, who took these decisions. Did I also start thinking about public transport, and the way cities are formed, who takes these decisions for the city, and who's impacted. I'm also a member of a forum called the Bengaluru Bus Prayanikara Vedike. It's like Leo said, it's a bus commuters platform. I think it's one of the few bus commuters platforms in the country. And we came together in 2013 as a network, because we felt that there was no space in the city for bus commuters to raise their issues. And, in fact, we were specifically formed in response to a bus fare hike which was announced in 2013. And today's topic is also affordability of public transport. And I'd just like to say that our longest campaign has been on making public transport in bus-based public transport in Bangalore affordable. So in 2013, the government hiked the fares, and we had protests. We had long protests. There were various people who were part of the forum: sex workers unions, garment workers unions, domestic workers unions, geographers, researchers, engineers, lawyers, etc. And it was for the first time that even the media started taking note of the affordability of public transport. And for the last 7 years, through the work we've been doing at Bus Bengaluru, at least one thing which has shifted is the fact that there is the discourse around public transport has shifted a bit. And while the government did hike the fares again once in 2014, I'm glad to say that after 2014, Bangalore has not seen a bus. Anybody to think of a bus fare hike, they always think twice. Around a year or so back, when Mr. Kumaraswamy was the chief minister, they were again thinking of a bus fare hike, and we did have a campaign, and they stalled the bus fare hike at that time. The discussion of affordability of public transport is really important, because as long as public transport is not affordable, it's not accessible to many people. And when public transport is not accessible, people's right to education and their right to livelihood gets affected. As far as public transport is concerned, we see that usually the discourse around public transport is about congestion, it's about pollution, and it's about whether we want a metro, we want a mono, and these kind of things. But the right to mobility, and how the right to mobility impacts other rights of right to livelihood or education, or even your right to leisure, is never discussed. But it's a really crucial aspect. For example, in Bangalore, even though we've not had a bus fare hike since 2014, Bangalore has one of the highest bus fares in the country. In fact, it's so high that there are domestic workers who travel even 6 to 7 kilometers by walk. They walk 6 to 7 kilometers because the fare for even 6 to 7 kilometers is not affordable. And if you see the monthly bus pass in Bangalore, it's 1,050 rupees. And the reason that fares are high across, at least in Bangalore and some other cities in the country, is that the organizations which are in charge of bus-based public transport have become corporations. So in Bangalore, we had the Bangalore Transport Service, which then became BMTC as an incorporated company, Bangalore Metropolitan Transport Corporation. And bureaucrats and politicians feel that BMTC must make its own revenue. BMTC profit making. But even those who don't focus on profit making always say that BMTC has to get its own revenue, which means that, and the largest source of revenue, more than 80%, is from fares, which is why the corporations keep the fares high. Even though there's some other revenue like advertisements and rentals from the shops in the TTMCs, the largest source of revenue is bus fares. And one of the things which we've been pushing for is that the government needs to look at public transport as an investment. Governments usually see public transport as a subsidy, but we are saying that it's not a subsidy, it's an investment. When you can invest thousands of crores in greenfield projects like the metro. Bangalore Metro, for example, phase 1 was 15,000 crore. Phase 2, the budget is around 36,000 crore. So around 50,000 crores for a metro. When buses don't even get 500 crores a year, they don't get even 200 crores, they get around 75 crores a year. Of course, this year was the exception that BMTC was given around 375 crores to buy new buses. But because of the pandemic and because of the fact that buses were not running for 2 months, and even after that, there are not enough commuters, the fare has, the money given to buses has been used to. So this is, why bus fare is important, how governments look at bus fares, and how the government needs to change the way they look at bus fares. We have a really exciting lineup of speakers today with vast experience, and I'd like to hand it over to the speakers so that they can speak more about the issue. And just as a note to our speakers, you have between 10 to 12 minutes each. And if you'd like at around 10 or 12 minutes, I can just give you a reminder via a message on the Zoom, or I can just come back onto the screen and just give you a reminder. So our first speaker today will be Professor Dinesh Mohan, and I'd request Professor Dinesh Mohan to please go ahead and share his thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. Since you started with the issue of fares, I would start with that. And I think one basic principle is that a bus fare in all societies where motorcycles are very common, two-wheelers, which is all of Southeast Asia and South Asia, some countries in Africa, wherever you have a large proportion of motorcycles, the bus fare has to be less than the cost of petrol per kilometer of a motorcycle. So therefore in India, that means that the bus fare must be less than 1 rupee per kilometer at least. If it's more than that, there is no reason why someone should not own a motorcycle and use it. Because motorcycle, you can get somewhere from point to point faster on a motorcycle than on a bus in almost any country. So number one is the bus has to be cheaper than private transport. Number two, the whole issue of funding. I think that's where we get stuck. Whether it's a corporation or a public sector organization, it needs to be funded because a bus at 1 rupee a kilometer or less fare cannot run on the fare alone. It has to get additional funds as a subsidy, because it is a public good. And because it is a public good, it's not charity, it's a necessity. And the only way we think we should raise money for public transport, especially in cities, is by taxing the city citizens. I do not believe that that city bus services should get subsidy from central funds. Because why should the person in a village buying a brewery be subsidizing someone else's transport in the city? It's completely undemocratic. So the one way to do that is to have a dedicated tax of 1% for all employees. So the employer has to give 1% of the salary to the to the government to be invested. It's a dedicated, don't go to the central fund. 1% of the wages should go above, say, 20,000 rupees a month. Everyone who gets more than 20,000 rupees a month 1% of the salary should be given by the employer to the government. And that should be a reasonable amount to fund your public transport, because public transport should not, and once it is being funded by the people of the city under a fair and transparent plan, then the city will control the public transport in demand, service, and efficiency. It should not be controlled by IAS officers controlled from Delhi. And so the person who runs the company should be someone who's elected or appointed in the city, from the city, and not deputed as an IAS officer or IPS officer from somewhere else. So the managing director of the company should have an interest and a vested interest in the city to provide good services. Secondly, there's a complete confusion that buses should not be crowded. No public transport system can run without being crowded, except in very, very rich countries where the number of people is very few who use buses. So during rush hour, public transport has to be crowded, and for a public transport money to raise funds, it needs more passengers. And what's very interesting is in the last 5 years, in most cities, the number of passengers per bus per day have been decreasing. In spite of, and the reason is, as people are becoming richer, more and more people are shifting to motorcycles. And also with Uber and Ola, more people are, especially women, are using shared Ola and Uber. And so public transport use is likely to become even less with shared Uber and Ola. And we don't have good data from places in India, but we do have a couple of studies from Europe, especially a very good study from New York City, showing that after the Uber came into New York City, public transport use has decreased, pollution and congestion have increased because of Uber and shared taxis. So I would say that those are the two issues regarding fares and subsidy and how to raise the money. It has to be raised by taxing the rich of people in the city. And I think 1 or 2% of your salary is not too much to pay for people. Thirdly, all buses, without exception, should be air conditioned and low floor. Because with the middle class being able to use secondhand cars and motorcycles so easily, one has to make sure that the bus is comfortable, air conditioned, and easy to get in or out, in which doors close automatically. Because we know from a study in Bangalore that more people get hurt getting in and out of buses than in accidents, if the doors are not kept closed while the bus is running. So the idea that there should be different fares for air-conditioned and non-air conditioned buses is absolutely wrong. And I think the issue of how much money is spent on metros was raised. I think it's very important to understand this, that the metro system does not mind 50 or 60 employees per station, and they're paid. Now, suppose you had 1 or 2 employees, 1 employee or half an employee per bus stop, then a lot of issues would be taken care of regarding safety and so on. And so all that can be taken care of by a well-run company, public or private, with fair play as a public institution, whose funds, accounts, everything is public, and what they do and why they do is fair and square. I think one of the most important issues regarding people using public transport is that everyone who uses public transport has to walk at least 4 times a day. That's just 1 round trip. So you have 4 pedestrian trips, or some of them could be bicycle trips. Now, if you have to have 4 pedestrian trips, then walking has to be safe and enjoyable. If you look at cities around the world where people walk, there's one thing in common, that city blocks are short. There are no gated communities. For example, in Bangalore, If you're outside the Indian Institute of Science and you have to go up the opposite side, you have to go around. You can't go through the campus because of the gates. And similarly with large building community, housing communities and office communities. But if you're in London or Paris or Tokyo or anywhere, there is no such large block. So what we say is that if you go from A to B as the crow flies, the distance should be shortest. Because of locked communities and large blocks in India, walking from A to B is not easy. You have to go around large gated communities or institutions, etc. So your walk is not comfortable, is not short enough. Secondly, when you're walking, see, we're always worrying about supply. Supply is not enough. And I can prove that from my own institution in IIT Delhi. Almost all the faculty members live on campus. So they are hardly half a kilometer away from their office, if maximum 700 meters. But all of them drive to work. There's a safe pedestrian path, shaded, but everyone drives to work. So just supply of sidewalks, just supply of buses is not enough. If you have to, people have to enjoy their walk, because our cities have already been built. One thing is we have to allow hawkers on all our roads so that the roads become safe. And people who walk need cold drinks, they need to get their chappals repaired, and so on and so forth. So you have to have shops and or hawkers on all the roads and kiosks. And so it's very, very important to have businesses on every road on the ground floor where buses run. You can't have boundary walls. And you have a proof from Chandigarh. In Chandigarh, you have sidewalks and bicycle paths on every road, but every road has high boundary walls with barbed wire on top. It looks horrible. There's no aesthetics. There's nothing to look at. It's very nice for car drivers looking at trees and lawns. But for pedestrians, they need to look at things, they need to look at art. You can't, even in Lutyens, Delhi, if you walk, all you see is barbed wire is centuries. You can't see any architecture. So, whereas if you walk in New York, you can look at, as a pedestrian, you see the architecture of the buildings. You have shops all along. You can window shop, you can buy food, you can, and so on. You can stop, you can talk with friends. You can loiter. It's very important that you should be able to loiter and meet friends and talk on the way. So I think my 10 minutes are over. So I think I'll stop there. I've raised 3 issues. One is the structure of the city. One is funding the bus system and the quality of the bus system. And the third is the pay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dinesh Mohan. Our next speaker is Professor Vinod Vyasalu, and I'd request Professor Vinod Vyasalu to please go ahead. Can you hear us?
I think he's muted.
Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah, now
Okay.
we can hear.
It's good to be speaking after Dinesh because I can just seamlessly continue from where he said. He started with the question of fares. Now, in economics, for providing any service, a company charges a price, a fare. The assumption in a lot of economics is that this works whenever there is a good or a commodity or a service that people demand and which somebody can make a profit by providing. A lot of the issues that we are talking about come from the fact that public transport is not a commodity in the sense that economists talk about it. Public transport is something that has advantages of economies of scale. The costs are such that a private operator cannot make a profit unless they charge atrociously high prices. Vinay already pointed out that Bangalore has very, very high bus rates. Even with that, it cannot make a profit. These services are called utilities, public utilities. And it is absolutely essential that the government step in and provide them. Another example of this kind of public utility would be pollution control. We now have private universities, and you know from the kind of fees that they charge that if this country depended on private universities, the majority of this country would not be able to afford colleges. Most people, Dinesh and I certainly, got educated in colleges that were paid for by the government. So we have to get away from this particular mentality, supply side economics, which says that a service should be provided when there is a demand for it. And by demand, you mean there are people willing to pay the price that is required to buy that service. Public transport is a different category. Education is a different category. Health is a different category. Now in these COVID times, we read in the newspapers about the kind of prices that are being charged by some of the private hospitals. 15,000 per day for a general ward. How many of us can afford to do that? So the first thing to accept is that utilities like public transport require the support of the state. This doesn't mean that you don't charge any kind of price. The kind of suggestion that Dinesh made, a small price for using the service to show that it is, you appreciate it, is fine. And he gave you a formula for a ceiling, that it should be cheaper than the next alternate mode of moving around, which inevitably means that the state has to pick up the tab. I think, as far as I know, bus services around the world are subsidized either by the cities, the states, or the national governments. The formula can vary. Now, this also means that we have to talk about the resources that the government raises. A point that Dinesh raised, he suggested that small percentage, like 1% of the salary of a person be transferred to a fund for public transport. But that's one way of doing it. But the problem in India when we talk about shortage of funds is because for the last 25 years, the government has moved on a path where they do not want to raise taxes, they do not want to raise resources. In fact, they keep telling you that if you lower tax rates, the amount collected will go up. In India, we've lowered tax rates many times, but the amount collected has not gone up even on one occasion. These are matters of fact. You just look at the information provided by tax departments and it comes through. We have a strange kind of socialism. Many of us, Dinesh and I certainly, pay the same rate of income tax as Mukesh Ambani. I mean, this is the socialism of the rich. I don't see any, on no stretch of the imagination do I think it's fair. Why is that? Why is 30% the top rate? And that too for any income over 10 lakhs a year. This is because a political decision has been made. There is a political will that let people pay for services, we will not collect taxes. And this is one reason that we are in the current COVID situation. It's only in the last few years that 1% of GDP has gone to health. In earlier years, it was about 0.8% of GDP. So sectors like health, education, public transport have been systematically starved because of a belief in what we call supply side economics, which is that markets exist, markets will supply whatever people need, and what people need is determined by how much they're willing to pay. We are dealing with a thing like public transport. If you look at the structure of this city, even IT companies, for example, many of them run buses of their own for which they charge their employees, and it is more than what the BMTC charges. I don't see why they should run buses. That is not their core competence. Let them work on areas of technology and let the Bangalore bus services provide buses for which they are paid. There can be two kinds of payments. Companies can buy regular passes, and the corporate rates can be higher than the individual rates that are charged to people. We should encourage students to use buses by using concessional passes. In many countries, senior citizens get free public transport. These are things that are happening around the world and can be done, except that we're being stopped. The other point I would like to make is the way these bus services are run. Dinesh made this point. We are a federal country, and the decision on Bangalore Metro is taken in Delhi by the central government. No, there were no consultations at all in Bangalore before the project started. Even the Bangalore City Corporation was not consulted. So long as we have a system where these projects are thrust upon us, there will be chaos of all kinds. Right now, there is a huge controversy about the number of trees being cut for the peripheral ring road. The point I'm trying to make is that the city transport service must be under the city government. It is not. The BMTC, an independent corporation, nothing to do. Bombay had a better service because the Bombay Corporation ran best. But even in Bombay, the ideology is such that they're trying to destroy the bus service. This is a fight we have on our hands. It's something that we have to fight. We have to make an intellectual case. We have to mobilize people. And we have to raise a lot of questions. Why is it that the Bangalore bus service, which moves something like 45 lakh people per day, doesn't qualify for any subsidy, but the metro, which moves at peak 5 lakh people per day, does get a subsidy? Why is it that we make a big hullabaloo about buses being air conditioned, but assume it is fine for all metro to be air conditioned? So there are a number of these kind of questions that come up. We talk about who makes the decisions, how the people who use the buses have no say in the kind of bus service that is set up. It goes back to a centralized bureaucracy controlled from Delhi. In fact, it's funny, there's a National Commission of Teachers, and I don't think it has a teacher on it. They're all babus. So the point I want to make is that we must assert that this is a right, the right to mobility that Vinesh Srinivas talked about. Right to mobility is basic. It must be universal. Everyone should have access to it. The city must be consulted. Profit loss calculations should not mean that the far reaches of the city do not have adequate service. And as Dinesh said, improve the services, have somebody at bus stops so that some of these accidents and things can be reduced, and make that the fundamental backbone of the service for which others can. And one necessary condition for this is for us to stop giving subsidies to private cars. There should be a punitive level of parking fees. The other day in UB City, I saw a board which says parking 1,000 rupees per hour. That's a private parking. People are obviously paying it. Why is it that we do not charge people for parking? So we must increase pollution taxes, discourage car travel, particularly single-driven cars, and encourage public transport making. For this, the role of the state is important, but the role of the citizens at the local level is equally critically important. I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vyasalu. Both Professor Dinesh Mohan and Professor Vyasalu raised some important and connected points. One is we also have to look at the form of the city. Secondly, like Professor Dinesh Mohan said, we cannot have bus fares which are higher than the next available form of transport, which is individual. And from Bus Pranikara Vedike, we had made a chart a few years back which compared bus fares, metro fares, and how much it costs to use a two-wheeler between a particular spot, say Vijayanagar and Shivajinagar in Bangalore. And it's cheaper to use a two-wheeler. If you have the capital cost, if you can buy a two-wheeler, it's much cheaper to use a two-wheeler than to use a bus in Bangalore today. And that is definitely one of the factors which has been driving people away from the bus. One of the things we've been trying to tell BMTC is that cheaper fares might actually lead to more revenue for you, because it means that more people will use the bus. And in 2014, when the bus fares got hiked, they said that revenue actually came down because a significant number of users moved away from the bus, to two-wheelers. ಸೊ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಸಹ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಬಸ್ ದರ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗ್ತಿರ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಜನ ಅದನ್ನ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡೋದು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು, ಬಸ್ ದರ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಆಗ್ಲೇ ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ಅನೇಕರಿಗೆ ಬಸ್ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸಲು ಸಹ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಈಗ 1050 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಬಸ್ ಪಾಸ್. ಈಗ ಸುಮಾರು ಜನ ನಾವು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ ಭೇಟಿ ಆಗಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ 7,000 8,000 ಸಂಬಳ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. There are contract workers who are even now paid 7,000 8,000 in Bangalore, and if they have to buy a bus pass for 1,050, what is really left for them to do anything else, because none of them have own houses, so they also have to pay on rent. So affordability is very key, but bureaucrats don't understand it. This year, before the Karnataka budget was presented, we met the Principal Secretary Finance, and we said that you have to allot more money to BMTC so that they can bring down the fares, because they're in a very bad situation. And he literally screamed at us. He said, how dare you ask for money from the government to bring down fares? How can Bangaloreans not pay for their bus ticket? If you cannot even pay for your bus ticket, what is it that the government can do? I will provide money for buying buses, but I cannot provide any money for lowering the fares. That cannot be done, and people have to pay for their fares. So ee ರೀತಿ ಒಂದು ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಇದೆ. ಹಲವಾರು ಜನ ಅಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಸುಮಾರು ಜನ ಮಂತ್ರಿಗಳಿಗೂ ಸಹ ಬಸ್ ದರ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ BMTCಗೆ ಇನ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. So with that, I move to the next speaker, Ms. Mamta Yajman from Gamana Mahila Samuha. Mamta ಅವರು ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಂತೀನಿ.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ವಿನಯ್, ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ?
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಮುಂದುವರಿಸಿ.
ಈ ಒಂದು ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ಅನ್ನ ಆಯೋಜನೆ ಮಾಡಿರುವಂತಹ ESG ಗುಂಪಿಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ನಾನು
ಒಂದು ನಿಮಿಷ ಮಮತಾ ಅವರೇ, ನಾನು ಈ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಲೇಷನ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಹೇಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಸೊ ಇಫ್ ಯು ಎನಿ ಆಫ್ ಯು ವಾಂಟ್ ಅ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಲೇಷನ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ Kannada to English, Karthik will do it for you. You just have to go to the bottom of the screen and choose interpretation. And I think if you click French, it's actually Kannada to English. Okay? Yeah. Please. Yeah. So carry on.
ನಾನು ಧನ್ಯವಾದ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ESG ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಳಗದವರಿಗೆ. ಈ ಪಿತೃಪ್ರಧಾನ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಜೆಂಡರ್ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿಕೊಂಡು ನಾನು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು. ಮಹಿಳೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಸವಾಲುಗಳನ್ನ ಮನೆ ಒಳಗೆ ಮನೆ ಹೊರಗೆ ಹಲವಾರು ಸವಾಲುಗಳನ್ನ ಎದುರಿಸ್ತಾನೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾಳೆ, ಈಗಲೂ ಎದುರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾಳೆ. ನೇರವಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ಗೆ ಬರೋದಾದ್ರೆ, ಈಗ ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ವಿನಯ್ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಬಸ್ ಪ್ರಯಾಣಿಕರ ವೇದಿಕೆ ಕುರಿತು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ವತಿಯಿಂದ ನಾನು ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಭಾಗವಾಗಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ನಾವು ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಗ್ರಾಮೀಣ ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರೆ ಮಹಿಳೆಯರು ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಕೂಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಖಾನೆಗಳಿದಾವೆ. ಎಲ್ಲಿಗೂ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ಮಹಿಳೆ ಬಸ್ಸನ್ನೇ ಅವಲಂಬಿತಳಾಗ್ತಾಳೆ. ಬಸ್ ದರ ಅಂತ ಬಂದಾಗ ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಬರುವಂತಹ ಕೂಲಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅರ್ಧ ಭಾಗ ಬಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಇನ್ನ ಉಳಿದಂತ ಭಾಗ ತನ್ನ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ, ತನ್ನ ಜೀವನ, ತನ್ನ ಬದುಕು, ತನ್ನ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಎಲ್ಲವನ್ನು ಕೊಡುವಂತದ್ದು. ಇನ್ನ ಸಾರಿಗೆ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ಅವ್ರು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ಆದಾಯ ಮುಖ್ಯವೇ ಹೊರತು ಆ ಸಹಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇಕಾದಂತಹ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥಿತವಾದ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಕೊಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆ ಸಾರಿಗೆ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಹುದು. ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಜಾಪ್ರಭುತ್ವದಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಜೀವಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ತನ್ನದೇ ಆದ ಮೂಲಭೂತ ಸೌಕರ್ಯಗಳನ್ನ ಪಡೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳುವ ಹಕ್ಕು ಇದೆ ಸಂವಿಧಾನಾತ್ಮಕವಾಗಿ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಅದೆಲ್ಲಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಯಾರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಅದು ಎಟಕ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಮತ್ತೊಂದು, ನಾವು ಗ್ರಾಮೀಣ ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ, ಈಗ ಲಾಕ್ಡೌನ್ ಅಂತ ಮುಂದೆ ಹೌದು, ಈಗ ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಒಂದು ಏರಿಯಾಗೆ 7-8 ಬಸ್ಸು ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ 5ರಿಂದ ಚಾಲು ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಂತಹ ಬಸ್ಸು ಇವತ್ತು 2 ಬಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ನಿಂತಿದೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ಡಿಸ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಆಗ್ಲಿ, ಇವತ್ತು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದಾರಲ್ಲ ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕೋವಿಡ್ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ನೀವು ಡಿಸ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು ಬಸ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಷ್ಟು ಜನ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಅವ್ರು ಹೋಗೋಕೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕಂಪನಿಗೆ ಲೇಟ್ ಆಯ್ತು ಅಥವಾ ಕಚೇರಿಗೆ ಲೇಟ್ ಆಯ್ತು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಟಾರ್ಗೆಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋದು ಮಹಿಳೆಯರನ್ನ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ಭದ್ರತೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾನು ಇವತ್ತು ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಕೂಡ ನಾನು ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರತಿನಿತ್ಯ ನಾನು ಬಸ್ನಲ್ಲೇ ಪ್ರಯಾಣಿಸುವವಳು, ನಾನು ಬಸ್ ಪ್ರಯಾಣಿಕಳೇ ಆಗಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಆ ಬಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೆಯುವಂತಹ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ಕಿರುಕುಳಗಳನ್ನ ನಾವು ನೇರವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಎಲ್ಲಾ ಕಾನೂನಾತ್ಮಕವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ನೀವು ನೇರವಾಗಿ ಕಂಪ್ಲೇಂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು. ಬಟ್ ಅದರಿಂದ ಫಾಲೋ ಮಾಡೋರು ಯಾರು? ಆ ಕ್ಷಣಿಕಕ್ಕೆ ಅವಳು ಯಾರನ್ನ ಸಂಪರ್ಕಿಸಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಬೋರ್ಡ್ ಹಾಕ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಬಸ್ ಪ್ರಯಾಣಿಕರ ವೇದಿಕೆಯಿಂದ ಸಾರಿಗೆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗೆ ಕೂಡ ಹಲವಾರು ಸಲಹೆಗಳನ್ನ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ರು ಸಹ ಆ ಸ್ಟಿಕ್ಕರ್ಸ್ ಗಳು ಇನ್ನೂ ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇನ್ ದ ಮೀನ್ ವೈಲ್ ನಾವು ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ, ಸಾರಿಗೆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಹಲವಾರು ಕಾರ್ಯಾಗಾರಗಳನ್ನ, ತರಬೇತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಕೂಡ ಹಮ್ಮಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ವಿ ಈ ಲಿಂಗ ತಾರತಮ್ಯದ ಕುರಿತು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ಒಂದು 50 ಭಾಗ ಸರಿ ಹೋಗಿದೆ ಅನ್ನಬಹುದು, ಆದ್ರೆ ನಿಜಕ್ಕೂ ಸಂಪೂರ್ಣ ಬದಲಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಎಲ್ಲಿ ತನಕ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮಹಿಳೆಯನ್ನ ನೋಡುವಂತಹ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನ, ಪರಿಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಬದಲಾಗಲ್ವೋ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ತನಕ ಮಹಿಳೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಆಗ್ತಿರುವಂತಹ ಈ ರೀತಿಯ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ದೌರ್ಜನ್ಯ ಇರ್ಬೋದು ಅಥವಾ ಮಾನಸಿಕ ದೌರ್ಜನ್ಯಗಳು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಗ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಇದ್ರ ಕುರಿತಂತೆನೂ ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಬಸ್ಸನ್ನ ಏನು ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಚರ್ ಇದೇ ರೀತಿ ಇರ್ಬೇಕು, ಬಸ್ ಮೋಲ್ಡ್ ಹೀಗೆ ಆಗ್ಬೇಕು, ಹೀಗೆ ಇರ್ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ವಿನಯ್ ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್ ಅವರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇರುವ ಹಾಗೆ ಹಲವಾರು ಇದನ್ನ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿತ್ತು. ಆದ್ರೆ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಸಂದರ್ಭಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರು ಅದನ್ನ ಅಳವಡಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಅಳವಡಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಲ್ಲ. ಕಾರಣ ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಬದಲಾವಣೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಂಗೆಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಪ್ರಭುತ್ವದಲ್ಲಿ ಜನಸಾಮಾನ್ಯರ ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಸಮುದಾಯದಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತಹ ಮಹಿಳೆಯರನ್ನ ಮೀಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಏನ್ ಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ, ಆ ಬಸ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯ ಭದ್ರತೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ, ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯ ಸುರಕ್ಷತೆ ಕಂಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು, ಅವಳಿಗೆ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಯಾವುದೇ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ರೆವಿನ್ಯೂ ಬಹಳ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್. ರೆವಿನ್ಯೂ ಒಂದು ಬೇಕಷ್ಟೇ ಅವಳಿಗೆ. ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ನನ್ನ ಊರಿಂದ ನಾನು ಮಾತಾಡೋದಾದ್ರೆ, ಅದೇ ನಾನು KSRTC ನಮ್ಮ ಊರಿಂದ 12 ಕಿಲೋಮೀಟರ್ ನಾನು ಜರ್ನಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ 15 ರೂಪಾಯಿ KSRT, ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ರಾಜ್ಯ ರಸ್ತೆ ಸಾರಿಗೆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ. ಅದೇ ನಾನು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು BMTC ಅಂತ ನಾವೇನ್ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು 20 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಬೆಳಿಗ್ಗೆ ನಾನು ಟ್ರಾವೆಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು, ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟೇಜ್ಗೆ ಅವರು 20 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಅವರು ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ಲೇಬೇಕಂತೆ, ಟಾರ್ಗೆಟ್ ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಂತೆ. ಹಾಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತಹ ಪ್ರಯಾಣಿಕರಿಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಹೊರೆ, ಹಾಗೇನೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿರುವಂತಹ ನೌಕರರಿಗೂ ಹೊರೆ. ಅವ್ರೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿಲಿ ಇಲ್ದಿರ ಬಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬಾ ಜನ ತುಂಬ್ತಾರೆ. ಆಗ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಮಹಿಳೆಗೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೊಡೆತ ಬೀಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಅವಳು ಏನಾದ್ರೂ ನೀವು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಯಾಕೆ ಹಿಂದೆ ಹೋಗಿ, ನಾವಿಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂತಿರೋದು ಕಾಣಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ವಾ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರ ಮೇಲೆನೆ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಕೂಡ, ಹೌದು ನೀವು ಮಹಿಳೆಯರ, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಜಾಗ ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಾ, ಓ ಏನ್ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಇದು ಮಾಡಿದ್ಯಾ. ಈಗ ತಿಳಿದಿರುವಂತವ್ರು ಅದನ್ನ ಚಾಲೆಂಜ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ತಿಳಿದಿರುವಂತವ್ರು ಅದನ್ನ ಚಾಲೆಂಜ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾವು ಸುತ್ತಮುತ್ತಿನ ಹಳ್ಳಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಇವತ್ತಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಬಸ್ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ದಾರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಅಡ್ಡ ಹಾಕೋದು, ಯಾರು 2 ವೀಲರ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಡ್ರಾಪ್ ಮಾಡಿಯಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋದು. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಊರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ನಾವು ಇಡೀ ನಾನು ರಾಜ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ತಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ, ಇವನ್ ಉತ್ತರ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿಯೂ ಅಷ್ಟೇ, 4:30-5 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ ಅವಳು ಕೂಲಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾಳೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿ ಅವಳು ಸೊಪ್ಪು ಮಾರ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಅವಳ ಬದುಕು, ಹೂ ಮಾರಾಟ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಅವಳ ಬದುಕು. ಅಥವಾ ಕಾರ್ಖಾನೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವ್ರು 5 ಗಂಟೆ ಬಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು. ಅವ್ರ ಊರಿಂದ ಹೇಗೆ ಬರ್ತಾರೆ? ಇದನ್ನ ಹಲವಾರು ಸಹ ನಾವು ಅಹವಾಲುಗಳನ್ನ ಸಾರಿಗೆ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಗೆ, ಮಾನ್ಯ ಮಂತ್ರಿಗಳಿಗೆ, ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಕೊಟ್ಟರು ಸಹ ಯಾರು ಇದ್ರ ಕಾಳಜಿ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಲ್ಲ. ಎಗೇನ್ ಅವ್ರು ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಎಲೆಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ಬಂದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ತುಂಬಾ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕೋಆಪರೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಎಲ್ಲಾ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆನೂ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಓನ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಒಂದು ವೋಟ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕಿಗಾಗಿ, ಮಹಿಳೆಯರು ಅಂದ ಕೂಡ್ಲೆ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಒಂದು ವೋಟ್ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕಿಗಾಗಿ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾರ ಏನೋ, ಇದು ಒಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ನಿಜಕ್ಕೂ ಇದು ಬೇಸರದ ಸಂಗತಿ. ಮತ್ತೆ ತರಬೇತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಇನ್ನು ಮುಂದೂ ಸಹ ಈ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಇದನ್ನ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಮತ್ತೆ ಏನು ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟರ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು ಅಥವಾ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಇನ್ನೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಲಿಂಗ ಸೂಕ್ಷ್ಮತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಲಿಂಗ ತಾರತಮ್ಯದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತರಬೇತಿಗಳು ಆಗ್ಬೇಕು. ಅಲ್ಲಲ್ಲಿ ಡೈಲಾಗ್ಗಳಾಗ್ಬೇಕು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಬಸ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅಲ್ಲಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಮಹಿಳೆಯರನ್ನ ನೋಡುವಂತಹ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನ ಬದಲಾಗಬೇಕು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಆ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ಕಿರುಕುಳ ನೀಡಿದಾಗ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯ ಶಿಕ್ಷೆಗೆ ಗುರಿ ಆಗ್ತದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಆ ಪೋಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಮೂಲಕ ಆದ್ರೂ ಬಸ್ ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟ ಶೌಚಾಲಯಗಳ ಮುಂದೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ರೀತಿಯಾದ ಪೋಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಹಾಕಿದಾಗ ಇದನ್ನ ಒಂದು ತಡೆ ಹಿಡಿಯಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಈ ಕೃತ್ಯಗಳನ್ನ ಬಸ್ಸಿನ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಸಿಬ್ಬಂದಿ ಇರ್ಬೋದು ಅಥವಾ ಬೇರೆಯವರು ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಇಮಿಡಿಯೇಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯ ಶಿಕ್ಷೆಗೆ ಗುರಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮನದಟ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಕೃತ್ಯ ನಡೆದಾಗ ತುಂಬಾ ನಿಧಾನವಾಗಿ ಅಪರಾಧವನ್ನ ಸಾಬೀತು ಪಟ್ಟು ನಂತರ ಶಿಕ್ಷೆ ಅನ್ನೋದಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಸಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಈ ಒಟ್ಟಾರೆ ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ, ಒಂದು, ಬಸ್ಸಿನ ದರ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಮಹಿಳೆಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನದಾಗಿ ಬಸ್ಸಿನ ಒಳಗೆ ಅಭದ್ರತೆಯಿಂದ ಅವಳನ್ನ ಭದ್ರತೆಗೆ ಎಡೆಗೆ ತಗೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು, ಸುರಕ್ಷತೆ ಕಾಪಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು, ಮತ್ತು ಒಟ್ಟಾರೆ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮಹಿಳೆಯನ್ನು ನೋಡುವಂತಹ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನ ಬದಲಾಗಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಲಿಂಗ ತಾರತಮ್ಯ ಹಾಗೂ ಆ ಲಿಂಗ ಸೂಕ್ಷ್ಮತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ನಾವು ತರಬೇತಿಗಳನ್ನ ಕೊಡುವಂತಹ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ರೂಪಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕಂತ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಧನ್ಯವಾದ.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಮಮತಾ ಅವರೇ. Leo had just requested that I just do a brief summary of the points Ms. Mamta said. I'll just do that very briefly. Ms. Mamta is also a part of our Bengaluru Bus Prayanikara Vedike, and she stays in Anekal, which is in Bangalore rural district. And there are several aspects which she raised. Firstly, in terms of affordability, what she also mentioned was that for many of the women workers, the burden of running the family lies on them. And when they have to pay 1,050 for a bus pass, or even if they're not buying a bus pass, but a regular fare, sometimes they have to spend around 30 rupees a day, it becomes really difficult for them to manage the household. For example, if you look at garment workers, the majority of them earn around 8,500 rupees. So it's very difficult to manage running the house after paying for bus fare. The other important aspect she raised was that, the safety for women in buses. As part of Bengaluru Bus Prayanikara Vedike, we had undertaken a campaign in terms of safety of women in buses, post which BMTC actually set up a women safety committee in which our Bengaluru Bus Prayanikara Vedike was also a member. And Ms. Mamta spoke of how through our committee, we had designed stickers which give out the call center number, which women could call if they experience sexual harassment. But how, many of those stickers, some days after they were putting the bus, either the stickers were removed or the numbers were scratched out. And, we also, with BMTC, we did a training session, gender sensitization and training session for many of BMTC's conductors and drivers. But, it was like a very short session. And she was saying that it's not just conductors and drivers, but there are many commuters also who harass women. And women face harassment not just in the bus, but also in the bus stops and in the major bus stands. And until this situation is also addressed, it becomes very difficult for women to use the bus. And she's saying the whole perspective with which women are seen by policymakers, by people who manage the road transport corporations, this has to change. And without that changing, it becomes very difficult for women to use the bus. So not only must buses be made safer, and this can be done by better lighting at the bus stops, better lighting in the bus stands, but also increasing the fleet of buses. She said that, if we increase the fleet of buses and then there are fewer, the crowd is at least comparatively lesser, then that's an important way at which that can be done. So overall, she said that it's not just affordability, which is a factor, but also the safety for women in buses, which is a factor. And until these two are addressed, it becomes very difficult for women to travel, and this affects their livelihoods and their lives. She also said that, even many politicians around the time of elections, they speak of increasing the buses or like making sure that the bus commuting facility to their particular town or their particular village is taken care of. But once the election is over, they completely forget the fact that they promised this to the bus commuters. And she said that that is also something that needs to change. So that is just a brief translation of what she spoke very powerfully. I now request Ms. Tanika Shankar and Rohit Vashishta of the Yugma network to please come on board and share their thoughts with us.
Good evening. Namaskara. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Hi. I'm Tanika, and Rohit and I are very grateful and honored to be speaking alongside all of you today. And there were great points. And I think Vinod sir, Dinesh sir, and Mamta ma'am, all of you have covered very key points about the structure and understanding how buses can and should be more affordable and more accessible. But so I think from the youth point of view and understanding how buses can be more accessible to more of the youth, we'd just like to cover a few points in broad categories of accessibility and convenience. So I think I started using the bus very frequently when I was in 11th standard, and more than just being a means for transport, to me, I think using the bus also made me feel independent because I could get around by myself without relying on something like an auto or a cab.
Go ahead.
Okay, right, sorry. Right, so in general, also we feel that bus stops in general are also a bit inaccessible, which Rohit will be speaking more about. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanika. Ellarigu namaskara. Nanna hesru Rohit. How do we speak about accessibility? One was through the lens that Tanika has shown us. I also feel like accessibility can be seen through another lens. First, I would like to raise the point about the better connectivity of bus routes. Every point that Tanika and I have collectively said stem from our own personal experiences, as we are not experienced people in urban planning or policy making. But what happens when I take a bus from Banashankari to South End Circle, from Krishna Rao Park to Jayanagar 4th block? I usually have to go through a roundabout route. From where Tanika and I come from the Yugma network, we try to follow more environmentally friendly lifestyles. And we feel like following up, using public transportation goes a long step in reducing our own carbon footprint. And we would like to promote the usage of public transportation for everyone, especially the youth. So what happens when I do not go directly from point A to point B? I take more amount of time to reach from point A to point B. So it has happened to me before, and I feel like while we are planning bus routes, while we are planning the bus timings, we should take into consideration both the time and the coverage of bus stops to come up with a combination that actually optimizes both time and the coverage of bus stops. Another issue that I face while using the public transportation, while using buses or the metro in Bengaluru, is the issue of the last mile connectivity. Uh, I recently read a very fantastic article in the Deccan Herald newspaper um, of an experiment that was set out somewhere in Bangalore in a few buses, that they added cycle storages in front of the buses where you can store about 1 to 2 cycles. And then you can store those cycles, ride the bus, get off the bus at your stop, and then take off the cycles and go. I feel like this solves the entire last mile connectivity issue and also tries to promote a cycling culture in Bangalore. Another point that I have to lead towards is that there are so many environmentally friendly options available with us, especially for public transportation. We can use mass public transportation like buses and the metro. We can also switch to sort of more environmentally friendly individual modes of transportation like cycling. I personally am a great cycling enthusiast and usually go around Bangalore with my cycle. So the point I'm trying to raise here is that when all these options are available to us, shouldn't we try to make sure that these options work in harmony with each other? So I feel like having experiments such as this, the cycle storages in buses, can actually lead to a harmonized system of various environment friendly modes of transportation. To speak about, there have been various efforts to make Bengaluru the India's first cycle friendly city. Why not try to combine both efforts and try to make a better public transportation system for all? And the point I'm about to raise now is about affordability and convenience. So far, from my experience, there are two ways in which I can actually pay for my bus experience. One is through the ticket that I have to purchase through cash. The other is the purchasing of a monthly bus pass. And I find that while I do not require a monthly bus pass because I may not use it that often, buses in Bangalore, I'll have to switch to cash. What happens when I do switch to cash payment is that there's always an issue of change, that I do not have sufficient change to pay for it. And as times evolve, a lot of people do eventually switch to more convenient forms of payment away from cash. It's been seen worldwide that people are shifting towards mobile wallets, e-wallets, and unified payment interface like using apps like Google Pay and Paytm. Why not have an option to integrate these technologies into public transportation systems? I would also like to repeat a few points that some of the other speakers have mentioned. Is that
You
the
have
better
2 minutes
maintenance?
left, Rohit.
Yes, sir. I will finish soon. I would also like to stress on the fact that better maintenance of bus stops and shelters, especially during monsoons and night times, can go a long step in making the bus experience a much better experience for each and every rider in Bangalore. And I would like to say in conclusion that what do we as the youth say to everyone is that for the future, we should look at trying to integrate different forms of environmentally friendly public transportation together, make them work in harmony, and also promote the usage of bus amongst children from a very, very young age at the family level and at the school curriculum level. So with that, I would like to thank each and every one of you for providing us with this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a point which Rohit raised about, asking youth to also use buses and making it more attractive. And definitely that is something we've also seen that over as hard is it tries to attract car users and others to buses. And that's why they introduced the Volvo buses and we had bus day, etc. But one thing which also BMTC does badly is take care of existing commuters. Many large sections of Bangalore didn't notice, but last year BMTC usually gives a college bus pass. For college students, it gives an annual bus pass. And there was a problem in giving that bus pass. And usually you can buy it at any major bus depot. We have around 38 TTMCs and you can purchase it anywhere. But last year they had a really funny and painful rule where everybody had to go to Majestic. So students had to miss their classes, stand in queues for days. And there was even like a lathi charge at one of the places to buy a bus pass. So the point is that like with everything else in our cities, public transport is also a class issue, and BMTC or other road transport corporations rarely care for the comfort of existing commuters. They strive a lot to attract new commuters, which is good that they should attract new commuters, but they rarely take care of existing commuters. This is something that we must also keep in mind. We'll now move on to the question answer session, and if you have particular questions to panelists, please put it in the chat if you'd like a particular panelist to address it, or if you do not have a question for a particular panelist but it's a general question as well, please put it in chat. Sana, is there any other particular instructions as far as the questions are concerned?
No, there's nothing. You can go ahead.
Yeah, okay. And actually, I'd just like to use my power as a moderator to ask a question myself first, as the questions come in. And this is to Professor Dinesh Mohan. So one of the issues we've been facing in our advocacy efforts the last few years in trying to get governments to look at public transport as an investment is that there are several bureaucrats and politicians who go to World Bank, etc., and who have a particular mentality saying that this is subsidy, we cannot lower fares, etc. What would be your advice, because you've been working with bureaucrats at the central government and elsewhere for many years, what would be your advice in terms of how do we break this pattern of thinking that they have, that corporations must run on their own and we cannot look at putting money into corporations for fares or increasing the fleet as a kind of investment? If you could please share some thoughts.
The only way is political. There is no other way. And so the students, all the present users of buses have to have a political position and contact politicians and get some politicians, existing politicians who are sympathetic, and lobby with them and create a political demand at every election. And so the issue is that eventually the bureaucrats will listen to politicians. And so it has to be a political demand. And politicians should not be just seen as some bad profession, because that's what we have. We have these politicians. And so the local MLAs, the local councillors, whatever the political system there is, and if necessary, there can be dharnas, meetings, public meetings. If the group is strong enough, powerful enough to have a rasta roko or a stop traffic in favor of to press the demands, because wherever public transport has become an issue and it has been improved, it has come from a political demand. And so unless the students make a political demand and the present users, I think it's the present users who have to form an association and a union of some kind to make that political demand. Just talking to bureaucrats is not good enough. And of course, when one makes a demand, it has to be backed up by a document which says that this is how it can be done, and which includes how funds will be raised, how they'll be financed, what taxes, who should be, maybe there'll be 2 or 3, the Vinod suggested pollution tax. So therefore, if there's a pollution tax on every motorcycle and every car, which goes towards public transport and things. So there has to be something worked out which is concrete, which says that it is feasible, it's possible, and this is how it should be done. And that can be a political demand which ultimately gets passed as a local law, so that no one can buck it. If we just depend on the goodwill of IAS officers, that doesn't make a difference because they get transferred. And so you have to have Bangalore politicians who come from Bangalore, who are not going to go away anywhere, who have to get involved. And I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Professor Dinesh Mohan. Dr. Nagendran, a former member of NGT, had a comment. But before that, like Professor Dinesh Mohan said, in fact, one of the things we've been doing is approach politicians as well. And this time we approached all the MLAs of Bangalore and asked them to write to the Chief Minister saying that the Chief Minister must invest in BMTC. And the issue is that there are actually politicians across party lines now who see the value of public transport. But there are again politicians across party lines who do not see the bus as a way forward, and they feel that the bus cannot, the bus cannot be a solution. But that's anyway a longer thing. But at least the good thing is this time when we approached the MLAs, at least 3 of them wrote to the Chief Minister and said that this is a concern raised by bus commuters, and you must support BMTC. So I agree with you.
The point I was making is that it's not just adequate to make a demand.
Yeah, it has to be a political.
No, one has to say that we've consulted people. This is how our demand can be supported financially and organizationally. So otherwise they'll come back and say it can't be done. So there has to be some work done on how it can be supported locally.
Yeah, in fact, we've made an entire booklet on the various sources of funds and completely backed with all kinds of statistics. But we've also seen that the problem is we don't have enough political power because there's not enough members that we have. But anyway, I think I'm occupying too much time myself. Over to Dr. Nagendran, who had a point to raise. Dr. Nagendran is a former member, expert member of the National Green Tribunal. Dr. Nagendran? Dr. Nagendran, you have to unmute yourself. Dr. Nagendran, are you able to hear us?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yeah. See, I belong to Bangalore, but I live in Chennai. So I take the liberty of making a couple of points. Number one is in Chennai, they tried a very novel thing that instead of covering, say, from Jayanagar to Yeshwantpur, where now we talk about a lot of stops, and then we have been discussing a lot of things. But within an area, say within Basavangudi, or within a few blocks of Jayanagar, or Hanuman Nagar, Srinagar, and that place. So like that, within a pocket, if they have no public transport system, it will be very, very useful, especially for senior citizens. I live in a place called Kalakshetra Colony in Chennai. It is Besant Nagar, Adyar, and so maybe about 5 kilometers radius. And small mini buses were operated at a subsidized cost. So I don't know whether this is there in Bangalore. And if it is introduced, it would also reduce the congestion caused by big air-conditioned buses covering lot of distance. So this is one. And again, in Chennai, senior citizens are given, I think, 15 or 20 tokens every month free, so they can travel in air-conditioned buses, in metro buses, free wherever they want to go. And this is another thing, which can be tried in Bangalore. And then that youngster, Rohit, he was making a nice point about using cycles. I thought, no, if we can have, kind of a linking bus and cycle. Say, for example, from Gandhi Bazaar, you go up to Chamarajpet or so in bus. And then from there, you have to go to some interior road, 3rd, 4th, 5th cross in there. There, government should give cycle free of cost. And then, he can go there. After finishing, he can join wherever he'll have the bus. And this will be useful. And this will also reduce crowding in buses. These are a couple of points I thought I would make. And thank you for the opportunity.
Can I speak, please? Hello?
If you could just please put your question in the chat, it's easier.
I've already put it, but it's not being taken. Anyway,
okay,
let me just finish it.
Yeah, please go ahead with your question.
See, everything starts with the policy makers, okay?
Yeah, please be brief. And if you could
Yes,
raise it as a
definitely.
question.
No. I'm trying to be brief. See, we will have to make politicians and officials come to office in bus every day. After coming to bus, if they have to go to some meeting, they can use the car. This is one way of showing the people that they also travel in buses instead of making it compulsory for people to go on using it. And another thing is you will have to stop giving loans and other things to people so easily so that they can keep on buying second, third vehicle. That should be, and otherwise they will have to use the even odd and even vehicles to be on road alternatively. This is all I want. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Dinesh Mohan, there was a question for you in terms of what has been the impact on the Delhi bus system and the fare system after the public transport for women was made free. Whether there was a change in the other fares and like what has been the impact.
We have not seen a very good study on this, but it appears that there has been a slight increase in the number of women using the bus system, but it's not been huge. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter in the sense that it's a good thing. So there's no reason to oppose it. But in general, the whole issue about women using public transport, the issues have been brought up in this session for how to make it safer for women to use public transport. And the main way to make it safer, at least outside the bus and at the bus station, in the next 5-10 years, is to have more and more hawkers on the roads and hawkers at the bus stop. That's a perfect way of making sure that crime is reduced. So you must have people selling things all along the road, every 100 meters, 200 meters, and at every bus stop, and slowly have kiosks and shops, businesses on every major road where there are bus routes. There is no city in the world that I know of where people walk happily, where there's nothing to do on the road. And so we just keep talking about supplying roads and supplying buses and supplying footpaths, but we don't look at the fact on where do people walk. People only walk to bus stops and cities where there's a lot of commercial activity on all roads, number one. And so that makes it safe. And also it makes us social because people stop and do things at shops or hawkers, and they make friends there who are walking friends or commuting friends. You don't call them home. Because I know
the voice is breaking.
Is it better now?
Hello.
Yes, can you hear me?
It's better now, yeah.
Yeah, so actually the short point.
It's off again.
Sunay, I think it could be because we can hear Dinesh quite clearly.
Okay, I think the main point is that we have to get away from technology, that is CCTV cameras, police, and so on. We have to think of automatic ways of ensuring safety for women, which is more people in the street, more business on the street, more hawkers in the street, and so on, because every hawker is a friend of policemen and municipality. Every hawker is known intimately by police officers, to policemen on the beat and all the municipality people on the beat, because they have an exchange system among them. So no hawker, whenever a crime takes place anywhere in the world on a road, the police first goes to the people who do business on that road to find out what happened. Because they are permanent residents of that road and see every day what's going on. In some countries, shopkeepers, kiosk owners, etc., are agreed upon informants for the police for activity on the road. And if you are as old as me and Vinod, you would remember that in old Hindi movies, if the Devanand or Dilip Kumar was a police officer, you always had a hawker or a beggar as an informant on the road. So this has been known for a long time. And it's very, very important for people to feel comfortable when they walk or go to the bus stop. So when we talk of last mile connectivity, the last mile connectivity has to be to open up parks and build over time so that people can walk through institutions, people can walk through parks, people can walk through office compounds to take shortcuts. Because otherwise, the walk is long. The longer the walk, the less safe it is statistically. And the issue is that instead of focusing on how to attract car owners to public transport, I think a very important point was made in this discussion, that please start making the system much nicer to the people who are already using it. And if it becomes much nicer for the people already using it, they become your ambassadors to attract more people. Trying to get people who are not using the system should not be the main concern. That will happen automatically if the system improves, to the extent it will.
So I have another suggestion for this. If you want to make women safe, completely bifurcate all the buses into half. Front half to the ladies, the other half is for the gents. Let there be 4 doors. It's not a big thing, and it's already overloaded. And we have had enough bad experiences. Men coming and standing behind the ladies with such a rush and jostling around. This is one point that can be made. Only the conductor can move around through a cubicle there. Thank you.
In my opinion, that can only be a short-term, because we can't assume that men will always be horrible. And so I think that if men and women are equal, the women should be given equal opportunity to go where they want. And the system has to become safer. Having separate places for women is also segregation for women. And I think it's important that, yes, maybe for 2, 3, 4, 5 years you do it, but that's not a solution.
Thanks. Yeah, Mr. Maisurmat, there are some other questions as well.
Yes,
Leo
sir,
has
I
a
wanted.
question himself. So Leo, if you could please go ahead with your question. Leo?
No, I wanted to, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think there's a problem with I mean, a lot of people are reporting problems, so I was at the other end trying to resolve it as well. There seems to be a problem also transferring the conversation here to Facebook. So many people from there have joined us here. Hopefully more will join. But the issue here is, I think I also wanted to ask Vinod, some of the points that are coming up is also about how public sector is being marginalized almost everywhere. And it's no wonder that the way in which cities are now becoming extremely financialized and extremely privatized is reflecting itself in the way in which the bus itself is marginalized. So it's not just the metro is incentivized, unfortunately, I would say, because the amount of investment that we make in a metro could easily have been sufficient and more than sufficient to make anybody travel in a city like Bangalore by bus from anywhere to anywhere. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see in terms of an economic policy, if we can popularize that, what would be that kind of, what would be the texture of that policy that could make the city more functional? Of course, now that the metro is built, use it, but really make the bus more, with everything else that Dinesh has spoken about, how to make it comfortable to be mobile in the city, really, and secure.
Well, Leo, I think there are two things. There's an ideological position that you should leave things to the market, which means private companies. After all, what is the big thing in the news today? Privatize Air India, privatize, what is it? The government has a list of companies they want to sell off. Basically, the government is abdicating its responsibility. So that's one side of the picture. But even if we say government should be doing something, it doesn't necessarily mean the government of India. I think a lot of these things have to be done locally. We have Zilla Panchayats, we have corporations, we have, these are marginalized. They're nowhere in the decision-making process. There was some discussion about a political movement. I think we have to mobilize our councillors. We have to tell them that this is your job that's being taken away. For example, the Bangalore Corporation passes a budget, but it cannot be implemented until the government of Karnataka approves it. Now, this is a democratically elected body which has been asked. So, I think for us to be political, we've also got to make sure that the political system works. I was thinking about it when Dinesh was talking about mobilizing it. It's not just go with a properly argued plan to MLAs. We should also tell them that only those who support this will get our vote. They should feel threatened about their election before they act. And then you will find they have no great difficulty in switching. They're very good at changing positions. So, yes, there is an overall thing in favor of, against government action. After all, BMTC was created because the World Bank suggested it. Bangalore BTS was working perfectly fine. But there's an ideological shift because once it becomes BMTC, it has to follow the corporate form of accounts and all the rest of it. There's a proposal now, for example, from the government of India. It started with the earlier government called a direct tax code. Now, we have an income tax act every year. Why do you need a code? And then I went and looked at it. It comes from the Napoleonic Code. And the code is a set of laws that are so presented that it's very hard to change it over a period of time. Parliament has the ultimate power. Look at the Criminal Procedure Code. Each article is a law in itself. Changing 377 has been knocked off by the courts. But otherwise, it's extremely difficult to change anything. And if the government succeeds in passing the direct tax code, it means that the finance minister loses the ability to change tax rates in every budget. So there are a lot of things happening of reducing the power of government in the economy. And that's a larger fight. But at the local level, when we have something like public transport, we have to fight that battle. We have to fight the battle for public schools, for public hospitals. It's not one battle, it's a big one.
Thank you, Professor Vyasalu. I just now request all the speakers to please share their final comments. If you could have like around a minute or two final closing comments from Professor Mohan, Professor Vyasalu, Ms. Mamta, Rohit, and Anika. We could then, there's an announcement by Leo after that, and then we could close. So if you can have some closing comments, we could go in the last to first order, and I request Tanika and Rohit to please share some closing comments. And not more than a minute and a half or so.
Yes, sir. I would like to say that my closing comment would be that we need to integrate and harmonize different forms of public transport to make them work in harmony with each other. And we do have to switch to environmental friendly modes of public transport.
Thanks. And I'd just like to add that I think accessibility and affordability of buses and public transport should also extend to the means to access this, by which I refer to bus stops, bus terminals, and just general infrastructure to access public transport. Thank you.
Thank you. Mamta avare, any closing comments ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ?
ಹೌದು, ಎಲ್ಲರನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಂಡಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಸಮಿತಿ ರಚನೆಯಾಗಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಮಹಿಳೆಯ ಭದ್ರತೆ ಮತ್ತು ಸುರಕ್ಷತೆಯನ್ನ ಕಾಪಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಬಹುದು ಅನ್ನೋದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಒಟ್ಟಾರೆ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡೋದು ಒಳ್ಳೇದು. ಹಾಗೇನೆ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರು ಸಹ ಈ ಮಹಿಳಾ ಭದ್ರತೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಮತ್ತೆ ಸುರಕ್ಷತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕುರಿತು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡುವ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪಟ್ಟಣ ಪಂಚಾಯಿತಿಯಿಂದ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟೆಡ್ ಬಾಡಿ ಏನಿರುತ್ತೆ ಹಾಗೆ ರಾಜ್ಯ ಸರ್ಕಾರದ ಬಾಡಿಯವರೆಗೂ ಕೂಡ ತಗೊಂಡೋಗುವಂತ ಒಂದು ನೀತಿಯನ್ನ ನಾವು ರಚನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತೇವೆ.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. Professor Vyasulu.
We've been talking about the political. We've got to make sure that when we talk of the local, it's a locally democratically elected councillors and so on. I say this because the recent COVID has brought out RWAs in apartment gated communities. Yes, they're elected within the gated community, but they represent the interests of the gated community. And government is quite ready to give them powers and responsibilities. And that's a very dangerous thing. I think we should go by the generally elected thing and not get misled by these pseudo sidelines where the privileged find another way of getting advantages for themselves.
Thank you, Professor Vyasulu. Professor Dinesh Mohan, for your final comments.
Actually, I'd like to just go back 58 years when I went to IIT. There was no internet, there was no Facebook, there were no computer, nothing. But the BST bus service ran well. They had paper tickets. None of us could travel ticketless. The conductor could control the bus very well. There was no electronic signboards, but within 2 or 3 weeks, 1 month, after loafing around Bombay, we found our way around and used the buses all the time. And so the reason I'm saying this is that we have to remember that such public systems have been in existence for 100 years. And they functioned well 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago in hundreds of cities around the world. And so we must understand if they do it. And in addition, now you have all the other advantages of modern technology, but that comes on top of the basic system, which can function without the technology. And the technology is the icing on the cake. And we must understand this. And we must understand that in almost every city, which Vinod and I have discussed, where there's public transport, the public transport is controlled by the local government, which is elected. And the people who run the system are people selected by the local system, and so on. So I think we have to, and I would last idea I have that when we work, I work both with NGOs and with IIT and with other people. I think what's very important is that you have to have coalitions. It's very important that you take the people in the Indian Institute of Science and IIM and other institutions, other colleges and universities, special colleges in Bangalore, who are sympathetic to this issue. Students, politicians, political party, there has to be a cross institutional agreement on these issues. And I think it's very important to involve teachers and school teachers also, because they're also users of public transport. So that the demand, when we say that when you go to a politician with solutions, it's this discussion among teachers, professors, NGOs, who will come up with solid solutions. So that it's very, otherwise, if we don't have some background demand behind the demand, it's very easy for the politician to be told by the IAS officer, this is not feasible, it's up in the air, our studies show it can't be done. We have to defeat them at that. And we can defeat them because I believe there are a lot of people within our systems, in universities and colleges and high schools, who can do it. Because I can't believe that you can't find 100 or 50 such people in Bangalore who can work on such things. So I think it needs work, it needs coalitions, it needs solidarity. Now,
Thank you, Professor Dinesh Mohan. Leo, would you like to please close the session after your announcement?
For moderating a very exciting session, despite you having some internet connectivity issues, you really threaded the whole thing together, both with your introductory comments and all through. And I thank each and every one of our panelists, Professor Dinesh Mohan, Professor Vinod Vyasulu, Mamta Yajman, and Tanika and Rohit for contributing with very, very exciting ideas as well as deep questions. I want to say that each of these webinars over the last 4 weeks, this is the fourth in a 5-webinar series, which we are doing in collaboration with Bengaluru Moving, has brought in the deeper dimensions of what public transport means to us. And it essentially, as each of the webinars has spoken to the need to politicize public transport. We just seem to think it is a metal structure in people sitting and it is running on some rubber wheels or on metal wheels, and that's how mobility works. But it's really more than that. I think what has come out is that the bus, for instance, is one of the most intense intersectional spaces that you can find in a city setting, or just about anywhere really, where the choice of who sits with you is not within your control. So you actually get to have this extraordinarily random possibility of meeting someone to talk with or journey with or be bothered by or even fight with, at one level. But also if you read Vikram Seth's An Equal Music, the bus is a center point of this very exciting exchange between two lovers. So I'm not suggesting that it becomes a space for exhibiting your extraordinary affection for each other, but the point is that there are so many dimensions to the bus, which we simply don't seem to appreciate. And I think one of the possible ways to understand our capacities to make the bus central to mobility is to actually think of it as a space which we are ceding if we don't take. So we need to reclaim the bus in almost every dimension. We had Shika, for instance. She's the MD of BMTC last week, 2 weeks ago with us. And she basically argued in the same way. She said, the space needs to be with the people, and it's a people's system. And I think I can understand what Vinod is saying. It's just like the RWAs have ghettoized communities. There was a time when the public sector enterprises in Bangalore would assure that every employee would be picked up and dropped back by a fleet of buses. Today, what the private sector, IT in particular, which is a huge employer in Bangalore, does is that it poaches the bus system, which should be with the public at large, and then ensures that it only supports the IT workers. So there is a class division which has been unfortunately created by Narayan Murthy, Nandan Nilekani, Azim Premji, and guess who else is there? And we need to talk to our billionaires and tell them, look, you've got a lot of money. Why don't you reinvest in your own fleets and make sure your people don't have to drive up and down? And also ask them to argue with us against the elevated corridors, which tears away the fabric of the city, destroys or the so-called peripheral roads. Now, these are structures which you need when you gate people, when you create gated communities, when you create divisions on class, caste, and other lines. So I think clearly the message to me from this discussion, as from the previous discussions, is that we should deeply work for democratization and cosmopolitization of our cities, and the bus is central to that, and that probably will also be a very important strategy to work our ways out of this increasingly fascist state that India is becoming. So let's not just think of the bus as a mobility instrument in an urban setting. On that note, I want to also announce that the next and the final webinar in the series, we will have Professor Rajiv Gowda, who recently retired as a member of the Rajya Sabha. Then we have Uday Garudachar, who is a member of Legislative Assembly from the Chikpet constituency. And we also have the Joint Commissioner, Bangalore Traffic, Ravikant Gowda, who has confirmed his participation. So in addition, we will also be inviting each and every one of you, and especially the panelists from this session and also the previous sessions, to come together in a sense of a town hall meeting. Unfortunately, it's not happening in a physical space, but we also invite wider networks and groups to join us next week. And Bhargavi and I will be moderating that session to thread together all the learnings from the previous 4 sessions, and also take the report forward to the government in terms of how to make busing from anywhere to anywhere else, cycling from anywhere to anywhere else, walking from anywhere to anywhere else, second nature to living in Bangalore. So thank you very much. Thank you to each one of the panelists, and thank everyone who participated in this very rich and exciting webinar and this series. See you again next week.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
ESG.
Thank
And
you.
see you there.
And the recording will be available soon on YouTube channel of ESG, as well as on ESG's website, and on Facebook. Of course, it's there, but I'm told that on Facebook, this time there have been problems of the audio not working. Now, this is the first. Last time the connection itself didn't work, but this time at least the video worked, the audio didn't work. So we'll hope that, yeah.
Leo,
Thank you again.
are any government babus watching this?
It has been shared. Not that they're not. They're actually actively participating. Miss Manjula was couldn't participate. She's Directorate of Urban Land Transport. We have excellent participation from everyone. And next week we have the Joint Commissioner Bangalore's Traffic joining us. So
Good job, Leo. Keep it
two
up.
representatives, selected representatives. So let's hope for the best. I think something is changing, and we are helping that change happen for the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much.